This is a webinar, Lunch and Learn on IBM Cause and Panzura and how well we work together to solve potentially quite a few traditional NAS problems. We have Russell Catalano on, who is the sales leader for Americas for IBM Cause. And my name is Glenn Schock. I'm Director of Alliances for Panzura. As people are joining, I am muting them. So if you have any questions in real time, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. I'm also monitoring the chat during Russ's part, and Russ will be monitoring the chat for my part of this. So if you have any questions, you can hit chat for everybody and we'll go from there. With no further ado, Russ.
Awesome. Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate it. So everybody, welcome to the call. I am going to give you a very high-level overview in 15 minutes. Glenn made me promise to keep it to 15 minutes, or he was going to shut my mic. He said he was going to mute my mic. So if you have any questions and you want to drill in a little bit further on any topic I cover, please don't hesitate. And after this, I am more than happy to take a deep dive with anybody on any topics related to COS, on-prem, in the public cloud, or anything related to COS or unstructured data. So don't hesitate to reach out to myself or the team. Glenn will share that information with you afterwards. So don't hesitate to reach out for any discussion topics. So that being said, object storage in general is a new tier of storage for most environments that address that growth that a lot of enterprises are being challenged with in their unstructured data environments. So everybody's got unstructured data, everybody's got NAS, and everybody's got similar challenges. But the overwhelming challenge that everybody's suffering from is the ability to tier the data to a more appropriate tier of storage. So what's happening is they're keeping all of their NAS data on primary storage, and everybody knows that most of it is stale. And that's typical for most environments where their data is stale. However, because of the lack of tiering capabilities on the traditional NASs out there, and for the most part, the big players in the market are EMC, Isilon, and NetApp filers. And they probably have 80–90% of the market share of the NAS environment historically. Now, the problem is, if you have those types of platforms, you know that most of your data is cold, but you don't have any option but to keep it all on that same platform. So what this solution offers you is a modern approach at NAS, at displacing traditional NAS strategy so that you don't have to keep it all in that expensive high performance tier, or you don't have to back it up in the traditional streaming manner. You don't have to replicate it to other sites. And if you think about it, everybody's going to vary in their capacity points here, but the overwhelming answer that we get to the question, how much of your NAS data hasn't been touched in over a year? Most enterprises are going to answer with over 80%. And that's the demand for this topic and this solution. So that being said, IBM, we're unique in the area of unstructured data and object storage because we're the only vendor out there that can offer a private on-prem solution for object, a public cloud solution for object, and a hybrid approach to it. Now, other, EMC, NetApp, the other vendors in the NAS space, they can offer you hybrid approaches, but they're leveraging somebody else's public cloud. We have our own. So in reality, it's one throat to choke for any of these solutions that you see here. Okay, and then when you look at your object storage demands, the requirements, they're going to vary a little bit. However, the top four biggest requirements are you need the ability to scale. Your NAS environments just don't scale meeting the demands for most environments. What used to be, a couple hundred terabytes was a large environment. We have exabyte customers, and NAS just doesn't effectively scale to that without throwing a lot of hardware resources at it. So scalability, security. You want all the traditional basic security requirements that you have in your storage platforms. You want that in your object tier as well. Simplicity. If you think about your biggest storage platform, what it's going to be object down the road. It's inevitable because it's the most cost efficient tier of storage. It's not a high performance tier. It's where you're going to keep that inactive cold data. So it's going to have to scale exponentially from anything you have now, and it's got to be easy to manage. And then efficient, cost efficiency. On average, we're seeing at least greater than 70% cost savings on a geo-dispersed object tier than that of an enterprise NAS tier that's being managed in the traditional methods of backup streaming to tape, leveraging Iron Mountain, replicating NAS heads, etc. So I'd be negligent if I didn't share that we are #1 in the analyst quadrants. And I didn't have an opportunity to update this slide yet, but just yesterday, the analyst report came out for Object from Gartner. We are #1, 5th year in a row. So I will be updating that slide for the next call. And that Gartner Object Storage Unstructured Data Quadrant just came out yesterday. So just wanted to bring that up and share. Encryption. You're going to hear about encryption from Glenn, that they can do encryption. Most of the applications that you have can handle encryption. The object tier could also handle encryption. So it comes down to whatever strategy you want to leverage, that availability is there. So once the data hits our environment, we can handle the encryption both at rest and in flight. However, typically most environments aren't going to leverage the encryption capabilities at the object tier. They're going to do it at the NAS tier, and Glenn will talk about that more when he has the floor. So let me talk about geodispersion and erasure coding. And this is the only slide. So if you take away anything from this call, this is the technical understanding you want to have regarding object storage. So in a traditional manner, you would have, let's say, a 1 terabyte file in this example. And if you have traditional NAS, you're going to take that 1 terabyte file, you're going to write it to a NAS head in data center 1. So the 1 terabyte file is going to take up about 1.2 terabytes of raw capacity in primary data center. Then you're going to take that 1 terabyte file and it's going to get replicated to data center 2, whether you use an application or mirroring between the storage nodes. So right there, between the two data centers, that 1 terabyte file is already taken up 2.4 terabytes of raw capacity. Then you have your backup targets, whether you're using Commvault, Networker, Protect, or any of the other major backup vendors, you're backing it up to disk. So that's taken up with compression and deduplication, let's just say a terabyte. So that 1 terabyte file is taking up 3.4 terabytes of raw capacity on your storage in your infrastructure. And that's typical, that's traditional, that's best practices. With Object, that same 1 terabyte file, instead of writing multiple copies to different storage tiers, they take that 1 terabyte file and you slice it up and you write it to 3 sets of storage over 3 data centers, referred to as a geo-dispersed erasure coding strategy. And that 1 terabyte file with the storage overhead is now only taking up 1.8 terabytes of raw storage However, the data being written over 3 sites, with a 3-site deployment model, you can sustain the loss of any one site and still be fully functional. So you can think of it as a wide area RAID in that manner. So if you look at the end result, that 1 terabyte file traditionally is taking up 3.4 terabytes of storage, not to mention a lot more administrative overhead and management. And the 1 terabyte in object is only taking up 1.8 terabyte and a lot less management and overhead. So what does that delta result in? If traditional, more storage, more power, more floor space; object, less power, less, and that's where the 70% lower TCO comes in. Now, when you start getting into soft dollars like personnel, ecosystem, air handling, etc., it gets even greater. But the 70% that we typically show is hard dollars of object storage versus, let's say, like a NetApp environment that's mirroring and you're backing it up with Commvault competitive product. It end results in a very compelling TCO. And we're more than happy to work through those numbers with you. We do them very, very often to show the savings with an object storage strategy, complementing your NAS strategy. So deployment options. Here's an investment of 3.4. So licensing with object is based on raw capacity. How you deploy it in your environment is totally up to you. We support all kinds of different deployment models, but from a licensing standpoint, I want to differentiate the typical 3 deployment options. So let's say you invest in a 3.5 petabyte hardware solution, which equates to 18 nodes. So I take those 18 nodes, I deploy them in one site, resulting in a 2.3 petabyte usable end result, which is very compelling. However, you have a single point of failure because everything's in one site. You don't have any DR strategy. So let's go to a 2-site mirroring solution. Now, mirroring, unfortunately, is not as efficient as geodispersion, and here's why. I take that 3.5 petabytes, I deploy it in 2 sites. If I want to be able to sustain a site failure, I have no choice but to mirror everything and have all my data in both sites. So that being said, I lose 50% right out of the gate. So the 3.5 investment deployed in 2 sites only results in a 1.1 petabyte usable capacity. Now, that same investment deployed over 3 sites, resulting in 1.9, which is a lot more compelling than 1.1. It also provides site resilience because site A, B, and C, I can sustain a loss of any one site and still be fully functional. So this is why we lead with a 3-site deployment. It's because 2.3, 1.1, 1.9. You're paying the same thing for all 3, but your end usable capacity result is dictated by your deployment strategy. Okay? Remember what I said. If anybody's got any questions about what I'm talking about, just take yourself off mute. It's a small group, so it wouldn't be, interruptive, and I'll answer any questions live. And Glenn, I'm sure you'll interrupt me if anything comes through the chat. Okay, compliance. I'm sure everybody's got different compliance needs, whether you're in the Fed space, healthcare, financial. We support FIPS, SEC, CGIS, and we're certified by the standard certification processes that are out there for those compliance requirements to meet them. Licensing. Very simple licensing model. You buy your hardware based on the solution, and I work with you to define what the hardware requirements are, typically based on what are your usable requirements, how many sites do you have, let's talk about deployment options, and then we put together the hardware. You buy your hardware just like you do your normal hardware. These are just your standard x86 type servers that come in 12 drive flavors up to 106 drive flavors. So we work with you to determine what's in your best interest, and they're all partially populatable. So you can start out small and scale it non-disruptively. So you buy your hardware that you need and you pay for it with your typical 3 years of support, and you could refresh the hardware as needed. Your software is very simple. You buy it based on your raw capacity, and that's it. Everything we talk about is included. There's no software options. It's just based on raw capacity. So if you need, for example, a petabyte of usable, you'll buy like 1.7 petabytes of software, deploy it over 3 sites, and there's your 1 petabyte usable capacity. And then you have accessors. The accessor nodes are what talk to the application, and they are not licensable. So you just stand those up as needed. They could be physical, virtual, or Docker. And if you have a peak requirement for performance, you would scale the accessors as needed. Unlike our competitors where the accessor is integrated with the slice store, you have to scale them both simultaneously. With us, we have the accessor tier independent of the slice store. So if you need to scale storage capacity, you add slice store nodes. If you need to scale performance, you scale accessor nodes. And then your manager, you're only going to have one, regardless of how big your environment is. Then I'm just going to throw this in. This is my only marketing slide. If you have any of the IBM Spectrum suite of products, our object storage supports all of them on the back end. Here is a visual of what an environment looks like, just so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. This example shows a usable capacity of 3 petabytes, geo-dispersed over 3 sites. The raw capacity is 5.7. I have 1 manager in the top left. I have 6 accessors, 2 in each of the 3 sites, and they're load balanced. And then I have 15 slice store nodes, and these are all partially populated. So if I needed to scale more storage, I can just pull this drawer out, add some drives, shove it in, and it recognizes the storage very easily. So with this configuration, I need 10 slice stores to read write. So I can lose up to 5, which means I can lose an entire site and still have read write capabilities. And then I could sustain an additional 2, which means I could lose up to 7 and still have read capabilities. So that's the level of resilience, almost the equivalent of a RAID. Okay, so you can think of this as a wide area RAID. So that's my 15 minutes. I expect Glenn to start poking me or grab me with a hook at this point. Are there any questions regarding what I've just covered? I covered a lot. It was kind of superficial, but the focus of this call is more importantly on the integration and the feature functionality that Panzura brings to the table, and that's where we want to focus. This is just the storage tier behind Panzura in this case. So if there's any questions, just bring them up. I'm going to be on the call for the remainder of the call. Don't hesitate to bring them up, or reach out to us following this, and we could open up a dialogue with you alone to discuss whatever solutions you want to talk about. Okay, Glenn, it's all you. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and mute, and I will be monitoring the chat as Glenn mentioned.
Thanks, Russ. All right. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Otherwise, hit us up in the chat. Russ will be monitoring that since I'm in full screen mode. Everyone can, hey, Russ, can you confirm you can see my screen and stuff? All right.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so who is Panzura? Panzura is a fabric that transforms IBM cause into a high-performance file system. Effectively, what our software does is takes Russ's IBM cause technology that he just went through and brings it into a new market space for NAS. So in direct NAS competition with, let's say, Network Appliance or Isilon. Why do we exist? We exist because those other technologies haven't changed in over 20 years. NAS has always traditionally been a silo. So it's basically a box with some storage in it. And when that box runs out of performance on the front end, so on the filer, so let's just say you're maxing out the filer CPU, or it runs out of performance on the back end with connectivity to the amount of drives that you can throw into that NAS box, you end up having to buy another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. Now, each of these boxes individually have deduplication, which you have to pay for separately, compression, encryption, all that other stuff, but they don't deduplicate globally. So if you have a file that is in all 20 of your NetApp boxes, then that file obviously isn't deduplicated across your enterprise, isn't it? So the reason why the technology for NAS hasn't changed in 20 years is because it's very beneficial for the vendors. They charge you software licensing and hardware licensing and maintenance for each of those boxes individually. Thus, why change that model if it's highly lucrative for you not to? So how is Panzura and IBM Cause combined? How is that different? Well, for the Panzura filer, which is a software-based filer, and if you imagine, it gives you the same functionality as a NetApp head-end filer. You know, the NFS, the CIFS, the dedupe, the compression, the encryption, the remote replication, the snapshots, the clones, the whole 9 yards. But it does that at the front end that sits on your premises. So like this slide says, 5 locations or 500. So you install it via a VMDK or a Hyper-V on-prem, and then you can install it in IBM Cloud in a VM, Azure, AWS, GCP. It doesn't matter how many of these filers you deploy because you're only paying for the backend capacity of the IBM Cause no matter where it is. So our filers are the front end to that IBM Cause on the back end that could be sitting halfway across the country, yet the magic of the Panzura filer, the technology that we have in there, the intelligent caching and how we handle data, how we handle metadata, which is what this presentation is going to be about, makes it feel like to the end user that that data is sitting there locally, right? So if you have 5 locations or 500 locations, it really doesn't matter to us. You have one authoritative data source. What we have is a global file system. So if you have one location in San Francisco, another location in London, and there's a user in San Francisco that drops a file on that filer sitting locally to San Francisco, and that cause, let's say, is also local to San Francisco, the user in London will immediately see the availability of that file. It'll come up right in their Windows space or their Unix, whatever they're using, NFS or CIFS, and they can double click on it even before the copy operation's complete. And they can open that file, let's say it's a video file, for streaming immediately because of the way that we handle our data and metadata, and also the fact that there's one backend source of data, which in this case is the IBM Cause. It makes management considerably easier when you're talking about one file system, one global file system, and you're talking about a filer that sits in Hyper-V or a VMDK on premises inside of maybe a hyper-converged type of system, and then you're talking about 3 sites potentially of IBM Cause to meet all of the regulations and compliance that you have to work with. So your data is inherently off-sited. And you don't actually have to do backups. Something else we'll talk about during this presentation is the fact that less than, I think, a handful of our customers out of the thousands actually back up their data because the technology is such that it's no longer really needed. So we'll talk about all this in this presentation. So how do we make it feel that they're getting enterprise NAS performance at LAN speed but going to an IBM cause that could be halfway across the country. The technology within the Panzura filers that sit locally on premises or within any cloud that you want to put them in, or a hybrid of all of them, we have intelligent caching within those filers that will pre-fetch the data that you're going to get and then leave that data there. We also have byte level locking within our system. So if you have applications for the AAC space, architecture, engineering, construction space, that allow a file to be open for read and write in multiple locations without overlapping one another, as long as they're not changing the same byte, then we enable that kind of technology, right? We keep track of our locks between all of the Panzura filers. So in your head, if you think of a hub and spoke model, the hub being the IBM cause and the spokes being all the Panzura filers, that's how the data flows. But how the metadata flows, the data about the files, is more of a mesh that's networked between all the Panzura filers so that they exchange all that lock information in real time between one another. That's what enables that immediate global data consistency. And then the local caching is what enables local feel of performance. So what we can do is displace a lot of traditional NAS, but we can also displace potentially local high performance capability as well. So if you need high performance NAS locally, as long as you adjust the caching correctly and use the right kind of drives like NVMEs for local cache, we can do some pretty decent performance as well, even though it's going to a back-end, low-cost IBM Cloud Object Store. We have several layers of deployment for options, for pricing. Our Freedom Collaboration is what I've been talking about, that has byte level locking. You can do multiple sites. Every file can be open for read and write in all sites, as long as the application obviously supports that. Freedom NAS can support multiple sites, but only one site can have any individual file open for read and write. But that's obviously at a lower cost. And then even lower cost is a single site if you want to just do NAS as an archive to one location, then that's what we call archive. Vision AI is a different package, and that is a SaaS package for doing auditing and monitoring. I made auditing one word, either audit or monitoring of all of your storage arrays within the network. So it's not only a Panzura filer, but we can also audit NetApp boxes, for example, or S3, or whatever you want to point us to. And we can do some intelligent elastic search. We're able to do legal hold via Vision AI. Effectively, if you have a request to take the last 3 years worth of data, but no more, no less, we can know exactly what that 3 years worth of data set looks like, capture that within a snapshot, and then make that available. Normally that would take weeks of work, and Vision AI can do that within minutes. Like I mentioned before, the majority of our customers don't actually do backups anymore. And the reason why they don't do that is because by using IBM Cause for offsiting your data, you're meeting all of your compliance requirements. You don't need to back it up separately and have that long RPO, RTO time when you have a backend object store that we're not overwriting. So if you guys know what VSS is, you can look at in a Windows environment, you can open up your Explorer, right click on any file and see every incarnation of that file. So, and we'll talk about this in a minute, if it gets crypto locked via ransomware 2 incarnations ago, you can right click on it, go to the version before it got crypto locked, and all of a sudden you're good to go. So why do you need backups if you're offsited and have the ability at any point in time to take a snapshot and recover from that snapshot? Our system, you can set it to do snapshots at any intervals you want. By the way, we don't charge for snapshotting. And we don't even charge for snapshotting space. Obviously, IBM Cloud needs the space, so you have to pay for the disk storage itself. But from a software perspective, we're not charging for the space allocated for snapshots, right? We're only charging for active data set, which is also unique in the industry. So Panzura doesn't really nickel and dime our customers with snapshotting and remote replication and encryption and deduplication as features that we're gonna charge you more for. All of our feature set comes at the base price. Where do we do really well? Like I mentioned before, the AEC space, architecture, engineering, construction, and manufacturing. There are a lot of applications within that space that require very low latency, high performance. They need to have that local feel, yet this space is all about collaboration. And what Panzura enables is collaboration and performance simultaneously, especially with the COVIDs that happened recently. Everybody is kind of working from various either home or remote offices. We need to make that I/O feel like it's local. So the way the AEC space has kind of matured in this new environment is by using VDI for people working from home. They VDI into their office space. They have their Windows interface, and then that server that they're VDIing into is next to a Panzura filer, and the object store on the back end could be halfway across the country, but everybody is collaborating like it's local. Right? And Revit, Civil 3D, SolidWorks, all of those are very chatty applications and that need that NFS or CIFS connection locally. And that's exactly what Panzura enables, which is why we have the majority of the AEC and M space because it works. It very simply works. Finance. We have all of the FIPS certification requirements. We meet all of the security requirements for multiple 3-letter agencies, which means that we definitely meet the security requirements of the world of finance. We have customers, we have one customer that does about $2 trillion a day worth of transactions through a Panzura filer. While we don't purport to be a high performance computing NAS, we can do pretty good I/O. And the way that we handle that, again, is because we handle data and metadata separately. So we can do some pretty decent performance through our NAS box, but again, it's enterprise focused more so than high performance. In the finance space, what's also nice is our ability to take snapshots and then restore those snapshots to other locations so that they can do their test and dev. And all that other kind of functionality that is inherent within our system that others tend to charge a lot for. The media entertainment space is broken out really into a few different types of customers that we have. The easy one is like film studios doing or like a render farm. We have to get the data to the render farm and you got to take it out once the data has been rendered. Because we are a global file system, again, we don't generally play in the render farm space itself. You kind of want a lot of fast machines with some back-end NVMe, just dumb storage to do all that crunching. But then the data's got to go somewhere, right? So for ingress and egress for that kind of render farm, as a global file system, it works beautifully. A lot of those studios are using cloud now on the bare metal machines to do the rendering aspect of it so they don't have to buy the hardware over and over again. But then they'll put a Panzura filer within that cloud, right? And put a Panzura filer within their on-premises and their various locations. You can back-end all of that with IBM Cloud in the various locations as well. And now what you have is a global file system that makes that kind of collaboration very easy. Another type of media entertainment customer are folks developing games for like iPhones. And while we enable the same type of collaboration between the developers, what's more interesting is the kind of collaboration that we enable for data science. All of these applications, all these little cute games that people pay 99 cents for, collect a lot more data than you think. And what these companies are doing with that data is a whole heck of a lot of numbers crunching to figure out who their user base is, to figure out which part of the game is more addictive than the other. We're not proud of that. And basically make the games better for the users so that they can make more money so people can buy more pigs in Farmville. That's how old my online gaming knowledge is. Everybody can sit there and chuckle at me. Yes, I'm old. Okay, anyway, but that amount of data science, I mean, that amount of data creates, it's hard to aggregate. It's hard to get that data then into the cloud space and then take it out and bring it back to all the users. And that's the kind of functionality that the Panzura filer enables, is aggregate that data, normalize it, and then put it into an AI ML engine and then get it back out and spread it out to the rest of the user base. And that's what the Panzura filer enables for that space. So don't only think of us as a GFS, think of us as an enabler for other tools and getting our data to those locations. Healthcare, same problem exists in healthcare, a ton of data. So in talking to a top 10 CIO of a healthcare institution in Texas, what I learned is that healthcare data is no longer about the PACS systems or the radiology or all the traditional stuff that I'm thinking of when I'm thinking healthcare data. Right now, all of their biomed devices, like the beds that the patients are in, are creating tons of data, right? It's basically IoT, Internet of Things data that are being created by every device that's roaming around in a hospital. And where a CIO at a healthcare institution is having problems is getting that data, aggregating it, normalizing it, getting it into some kind of cloud-based analytics, AI, ML, even computer vision, right? So that the computer can look at the radiology and can look at a picture and see something that maybe a doctor can't or may have missed. So their issue is aggregation, normalization, and then input into some kind of AI ML capability. And that's exactly where we can help. The problem has been, how do we do this intelligently without any human intervention? So if you imagine, you put a Panzura filer at each of these healthcare institutions where it's the target for all of this biomed data, it gets aggregated within the GFS. There's some kind of intelligent automation that strips the patient records, because this is where the line of demarcation is for a hospital, between on-premises, right, and cloud. The data that goes to the cloud, they can't break their HIPAA compliance issues, so they would prefer, even though there are plenty of cloud providers out there that are HIPAA compliant and blah, 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 nobody trusts that. So they want to strip the data on premises, right, within their GFS. So take out the patient's name and all that information that can link a person with the data. So that's what they call normalization of that data. And then push it into a cloud for AI, ML, analytics, computer vision, the whole 9 yards. And then once that data comes out of that kind of numbers crunching, it needs to go back in the GFS and then spread out to the actual user base. And that is exactly what Panzura enables for those types of healthcare institutions. We are able to help them aggregate that data and manage it and simplify it versus having humans sit there and copy and paste data and all that kind of stuff. So why do they choose us, and where's the best place to position Panzura, and how can we help you as an end customer? If you have multiple NAS boxes, Isilons, NetApps, that type of stuff, spread out throughout your company, and you're looking at the cost of maintenance of those boxes, the hardware, the software maintenance, they're aging out, they're between 3 and 5 years old, and you're thinking there's got to be a better way, there is. Right? We help our customers drop their storage capacity. I know the IBM guys are cringing, but like we really do help our customers drop their storage capacities when they aggregate a whole bunch of NetApp or a whole bunch of Isilon onto a combined Panzura plus IBM cause. Because there's a lot of duplication out there. There's a lot of work that we can do to dedupe globally, as well as compress and then encrypt, to ensure that you lower your overall costs. Also, you're no longer gonna have to be paying maintenance on a ton of hardware and a ton of software that's really aging itself out. If you're tired of managing those multiple data sets that I just talked about, we have had customers where we dropped their capacity by 70% simply because they kept copying the same data set around to various locations for that local feel, local IO. Also the versioning that happens. We've all done this. I've made a PowerPoint file. I sent it via email to somebody in France and somebody in London and somebody in Japan. So they all copied that to their local systems. They all made edits and versionings of that file. They've emailed that back to me. Think about all that, right? If that was a decent PowerPoint file, now what we have are like 10 different copies on 10 different versions spread across 10 different geos. If that was all centralized on an IBM cause on the back end, if every one of those geos had a Panzura filer, how many copies of that file would exist? From a deduplication standpoint, there would only be one copy. And then every edit would essentially be just a delta of blocks until the final version. So you would end up with like what, 1.25 versions of that file versus tens, right, of them. So we can do that for you on a global basis. The immediate consistency is the kind of mesh network that I was talking about between all the Panzura filers. So in this example, if somebody here on the West Coast of the US dropped a file into a Panzura filer, the metadata of that file being created will be spread immediately to all the Panzura filers across the US and across the globe. Even though, let's say the IBM cause is located in the West Coast, and then another in the East Coast, and another could have been in the EU, right? There's a local feel from Australia because of the intelligent caching that's done within the Panzura filer, that intelligent prefetching that's also done. By the way, you can again put Panzura filers in a VM in IBM Cloud, in a VM in Google, AWS, Azure, Oracle Cloud. It doesn't really matter. They can all be part of this global file system. So if, for example, you're a customer and you have to get data into Oracle Cloud for the database, but you need it in NFS and CIFS local connection to ingest into that database, and that data is being generated in San Francisco, but it needs to be used in Japan, all of those filers are local. They all have access to that GFS, and as well as the one in the various clouds. So the ingress egress for a hybrid cloud approach, Panzura enables that right now for a lot of our customer set. And it is a reason why customers are moving to us, is to get that hybrid cloud capability without doing dumb copy operations and having to basically double, triple, quadruple their data set based on where it's located. And we talked about these latency prone apps, so I'm not going to redo all this. Collaboration, again, we've talked about that for media entertainment and all the examples that I gave, so there's no reason to redo that. And I want to get to cloud mirroring. So while we do know that IBM cause can sit in multiple locations, we may have customers out there that are on this Lunch and Learn webcast that say, that's great, IBM is fantastic, we want to use them as our primary backend, but we have an internal directive that we don't put all of our eggs in one vendor basket. We also are going to need to mirror that data to, let's say, GCP, right? Google Cloud Storage needs to have a copy of everything, and that will be our backup. The great thing is, Panzura Filer can do that for you. It's a feature called cloud mirroring. Effectively, what we're doing is called a write split. So when we commit IO, we're going to commit it to the IBM cause, and we're going to commit it to Google Cloud Storage. We'll get both acknowledgements, and you have cloud mirroring. That's all it takes. Point us to a second bucket, and we're going to write split to that. What is your additional cost? Simply whatever the cost is of Google Cloud Storage on the back end. That's it. No additional costs beyond that. You're only paying for the capacity. Running legacy apps, because again, locally, we're NFS and CIFS. I know I'm a little bit over time for Q&A, so I want to make time available. We have multiple 3-letter agencies that are customers of ours. We are FIPS 140-2 certified. We do all the encryptions. So we do encryption in flight with TLS 1.2. We are AES 256, and then we encrypt on the back-end storage as well. If you are targeting a back-end bucket like IBM Cause that does do encryption, you're getting no benefit from double encryption. Actually, I was a math major in college. Encryption is one of my specialties. You get negative benefit from double encrypting. You get positive benefit from triple encrypting. So if we encrypt and then the IBM Cause encrypts, it's actually easier to decrypt double encrypted data. I know that's mind-blowing. You're going to need to encrypt it one more time to actually get a positive net benefit. Or the simple recommendation is turn off encryption at your IBM Cause, turn off encryption at your endpoint, let us do the encryption, and everything is available. We support public keys, we support private keys, the whole 9 yards. So you can keep it yourself, you can use a key management system that is your favorite one. We're good to go there. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about ransomware. We aren't susceptible, period. There's no reason to back this data up. Like I said, as long as you're doing multiple sites, like with the IBM Cause, or you're doing cloud mirroring, let's say your IBM Cause is only at a single site for whatever reason, because you didn't pay attention to Russ's presentation, and then you want to cloud mirror over to GCP, that's fine, or to IBM Cloud, that's fine too. And the way that we protect you against ransomware is like I described. You're going to get an email from your ransomer that says we have encrypted all of your data. You're going to say, that's fantastic. You're going to go to your data set. You're going to right click on it and figure out on one file at what point was all of your data encrypted. You're going to revert back to the minute before that. And then you're going to automate that functionality for the rest of the files that were encrypted. And you can tell your ransomer to go pound sand, right? None of our customers have had any issues having been crypto locked. We have had customers that have gotten ransomware notices and simply recovered from them within minutes or hours, and that's it. No one's paid any ransom unless you look at renewing with Panzura as a ransom. Hopefully people are laughing and have eaten or have already drank alcohol. Okay, that's my shtick. We have a bunch of customers. We work very well together with IBM. We have a lot of joint customers there as well. We do very well in the public sector for this. Do I have a question? I think I got, Russ, do we have somebody in the chat? Let's see. It
just came in, Peter McDonald.
Sanctioned ransomware, right, is a Panzura license. That's exactly right. We just like to call it, we're sticky. So yes, we have a lot of customers using our stuff. This is an enterprise NAS play. This is about replacing a whole bunch of NetApps or Isolons with a combination of Panzura and IBM. It'll be a lot less expensive. It'll probably be faster, and it'll definitely enable global access to a global file system. We'll get less storage utilization, lower costs, and much happier customers. So that's my shtick. I'm going to stop sharing. If we have anybody, I can take everybody. You can take yourself off of mute. And otherwise, thank you for your time.